Guess what day it is? It's Menstrual Monday and the sun is shining, which means it's the perfect day to talk about vitamin D. Hello, my name is Isobel Ripley. I'm a fertility awareness educator and welcome to A Better World to Bleed In, where we leave menstrual shame and misinformation and denial in the past and we educate ourselves and empower ourselves through study and through nerding out and diving deep into some of the topics that you've been wondering about when it comes to your menstrual cycle health. I hope you enjoy the video, and if you've not subscribed yet, please do. And without further ado, let's get into it. Now, last week I spoke about magnesium, and today I'm talking about another micronutrient. Or is it a micronutrient? We will find out. Why am I extracting these individuals and making such a big deal about it? Well, I am a strong advocate of a healthy, balanced diet which allows you to get all of the energy and micronutrients that you need to sustain a healthy menstrual cycle. But when it comes to magnesium and vitamin D, they are unique in the fact that it is more challenging to get them solely from food sources. The fact of this symbiotic relationship with all the macronutrients and vitamins and minerals in our bodies does mean that when we have a particular deficiency, that could be throwing our cycles off completely. And because our menstrual cycles are a fifth vital sign of our overall health, they will be one of the first systems in the body or kind of warning signs that something is off. So that is why I am talking about these with such fervor. So firstly, what is it? 25-hydroxy vitamin D. That is its full name. And in fact, she is actually not a vitamin. She is a steroid hormone. You will see it written if you get a test for your vitamin D levels as 25 in brackets OH in brackets D. What the test will be is a blood test, and you will get your serum level, and it will be in a number and then nmol/liter. There is a limit of how much is too much, which we'll talk about in a minute as well. But the best sort of place you should be looking at if you get a test is 50 nanomoles or more. And that is agreed on that with that amount of vitamin D in the blood, that will help to benefit your bone health and your general health. That number has not necessarily been decided on from a menstrual cycle health and fertility perspective. And you'll find this with a lot of the parameters of normal when it comes to testing for things. Normal is very different to optimal, especially when it comes to fertility. Normal is generally the amount that's agreed on that basically keeps us alive. And there is a big difference between being kept alive and between being able to reproduce and have enough vitality and energy and resources in your body in order to create the incredible act of reproducing another human life, right? So it's unique in that it's the only nutrient, which diet is not our main source. There are two types, vitamin D2, ergocalciferol, and vitamin D3, cholecalciferol. And D3 is the most chemically similar to the vitamin D produced from sun exposure. So when we are supplementing with vitamin D, going for D3 is pretty much a must. And traditionally, the recognized actions of vitamin D include the calcium and phosphorus homeostasis and the support of bone mineralization, the reduction of the risk of osteoporosis, bone fractures, and muscle weakness. But more recently, there has been a lot more study and understanding done in terms of the reproductive system. So D is found not only in the calcium regulating tissues of the body, like the intestines and the parathyroid glands and the skeleton, but also in our reproductive organs, such as the ovaries, particularly in the granulosa cells of the ovaries, and the placenta during gestation, as well as the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland in the brain, which are our brain and part of our hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, which is the regulating hormonal axis of a menstrual cycle. So the implications of deficiency in relation to our menstrual cycle and hormone health include, let's say, are more related to our follicular phase than they are to our luteal phase. However, when our follicular phase is impacted or impaired in some way, thus is our luteal phase and our menstrual phase. When we have deficiency in vitamin D, how this can manifest is in impaired egg quality and impaired follicular development. And then the implications of low egg quality and impaired follicular development thus impact on our luteal phase and can lead to, for example, worse premenstrual symptoms. So egg quality, we might not necessarily be focusing on this if we are not in the stage of our life where pregnancy is on the cards, or perhaps we are not interested in pregnancy at all. And so we're thinking, well, why is it important, the quality of my eggs? It doesn't really matter. In fact, it does matter if your goal is to have a healthy menstrual cycle. If your goal is to bring regularity back to your cycles, perhaps you're dealing with delayed and irregular ovulation, perhaps you're dealing with extreme PMS symptoms, period pain. All of these things can be linked to the actual quality of our eggs. So within our ovaries, we have all the eggs that we're ever going to have. We've had them from when we were inside our womb, not our womb, our mother's womb. Every menstrual cycle, several of those eggs, and we can say eggs or we can say follicles kind of interchangeably, or you can think of the follicles as like the nest of the egg. When the egg is released at ovulation, the follicle remains and turns into the progesterone producing gland. And during the follicular phase, several of those follicles are starting to mature and develop in order for one to be released at ovulation. In that development stage, those follicles produce estrogen. And as they continue to develop, estrogen continues to rise and rise and rise. We need a certain amount of estrogen in order to trigger ovulation. So if we have impaired development of those follicles, then what can happen is estrogen doesn't rise, or it rises a bit and then it plateaus or falls, and then it rises a bit, plateaus. So delayed ovulation, long irregular cycles can be to do with that impaired follicular development. So the implications of, I'm so sorry about the building work, it is continuous, so I have to just record these videos. The implications of poor egg quality and impaired follicular development then showing up in our menstrual cycles and in our fertility can be things like those delayed irregular ovulations leading to long cycles, such as in PCOS, scant cervical mucus due to the low levels of estrogen, ovulation pain, and also premenstrual cramping and menstrual cramping. And then in terms of fertility and conception, underdeveloped endometrium lining leading to implantation failure and recurrent pregnancy loss, as well as a low follicle count, and in some cases thyroid abnormalities and insulin resistance. The recommended dietary allowance for vitamin D, the RDA, so that's what is suggested for most adults in order to maintain healthy bones and reduce muscle weakness and to reduce injury is set at 600 IUs a day. But this number is very much debated and controversial. Some researchers, including the Endocrine Society, which I would point out, perhaps is for our purposes someone that we want to be listening to a little bit more than kind of the generalized health advice, is the Endocrine Society, because obviously they're looking at what is most optimal in terms of hormone health. They have suggested that actually the daily allowance should be closer to 1,500 to 2,000. And then some researchers have even suggested that it should be closer to 8,000 a day, which is more than 10 times the current RDA. So why is this so hugely different? Well, in 2014, a review was released called A Statistical Error in the Estimation of the Recommended Dietary Allowance for Vitamin D. And I had a look at this review and I barely understood most of what it was talking about because it was in very much statistical terms, which is quite hard to grasp for someone who is not the best at maths. But what I gathered from it was basically just this review was doing just like a massive takedown of the reviewers who had set the general RDA, and they were explaining how, in order to get that 600, they reviewed 10 supplementation studies that had been shown to benefit bone health and prevent disease and injury. And they carried them out during the winter months above the 50th parallel north. And so that's if you draw a line on the world map underneath the UK, everything and everyone from the UK up. And they found that the daily dosage of 600 IUs was sufficient enough that 97.5% of adults in Canada and the US could maintain those serum levels of 50 nanomoles per litre or more that I was talking about. But a statistical mistake was made, basically meaning an essential math error. And in the correct analysis of this data by the Institute of Medicine, found that actually, rather than 600, the number was actually 8,895. So there you have it. You can obviously get your serum levels tested and then you would know, right? Because there is a fear that a lot of people have around vitamin D toxicity, which is called hypercalcemia. It's basically a buildup of calcium in your blood, and it can be caused by very high levels of vitamin D, often caused by high dosage supplementation, where in your blood it's greater than 375 nanomoles per litre. And it can cause nausea, vomiting, muscle weakness, confusion, pain, loss of appetite, dehydration, excessive urination and thirst, and kidney stones. Okay, so obviously if you are supplementing and you feel any of these symptoms, then that of course is a good sign to be getting a checkup anyway. I mean, if you have any of these at any point, then pay attention. But also you can just keep an eye on your levels, right? And it is actually difficult to achieve such a high buildup of vitamin D in your blood. In fact, most of us are more on the deficient side, and most of us have trouble to even produce enough vitamin D for that to be a worry anyway. But it's worth thinking about and being aware. It's a well-known fact that vitamin D comes from the sun, right? But it is not as simple as just going outside for 10 minutes a day and topping up your levels. The ability to produce enough vitamin D from the sun varies on a lot of factors. For example, your geographical location, the amount of clothing that you're wearing, your use of sunscreen, your other nutrient deficiencies. So because they're all in this synchronistic relationship, if you have, for example, a deficiency in magnesium, like we spoke about last week, then no matter how much time you spend in the sun, you might not be able to produce vitamin D from that exposure. You might have heard on social media the claim that the palms of your hands take in more vitamin D than the rest of the skin of your body. You might have also heard that if you expose your butthole to the sun, you can get, what was it they say? They said in 20 seconds of exposure of your butthole to the sun, you can get all of the energy that you need from the sun that you would get from a whole day of walking around naked or something like that. There's no evidence that your palms can absorb and produce more vitamin D than any of the rest of your body. However, it does feel nice. And with the thing with the, what do they call it? Perineum sunning. So your perineum, I said it as perineum. Sometimes I say it as perineum when I want to be fancy. So your perineum is the little piece of skin between your vagina and your butthole, and it is a very sensitive place. The skin is similar to that of your lips. In Taoism, it was considered to be very sacred, and as a fertility awareness educator, I love this because I also place a lot of emphasis on the perineum, because I emphasize how when we are testing and feeling for our cervical mucus, we can really utilize this part of the body, this piece of skin, to help us to determine the sensation of our cervical mucus. And also a lot of pleasure can be derived from the sensitivity and the vulnerability of this part of the body. However, there in the Tao, it was more to do with considerations around the antibacterial nature of sunlight and how the general health of your pelvic area could be improved by that exposure to the sun. You know, sometimes the research comes out thousands of years after and we say, oh yeah, they were actually right about that. But for now, I just want to tell you that, yeah, there's no evidence to date about that. And finally, food sources. So we have fatty fish, including sardines, mackerel, and salmon. We also have egg yolks and we have liver. So within a single sardine, you would likely find around 66.2 IUs of vitamin D, and that would be D3. From an egg yolk, quality is important. So from a caged hen, you're going to get about 3 to 6 times less of the vitamin D3 than you would from hens exposed to sunlight, pasture-raised hens. And then liver, the most nutrient-dense food on the planet, actually only contains about 19 IUs of vitamin D per 100 grams. So it's not loads. And then you might have heard the rumor that if you expose your mushrooms to the sunlight, then they will absorb vitamin D. It is true that exposure to a UV light for 15 to 20 seconds causes much higher levels of D2 in, for example, portobello mushrooms. But bear in mind, D2, and as we know, that is not so chemically identical to that which we get from the sun, so less useful in our body. And then additionally, some foods like milk, cereal, cheese, bread, yogurt has been artificially fortified with vitamin D. However, again, I'm not sure if that would have been D3 or D2. But what we can do is to ensure that our overall diet is really nutrient rich, because the more that we are getting of the other micronutrients which work in synergy with vitamin D, then the more we are reducing our risk of deficiency, and we can just carry on living our life, getting in the sun as much as we do, not stressing too much, because we know that the little vitamin D we are getting, we are absorbing and utilizing properly. So we want to be having a good source of magnesium, of K2, of boron, and of zinc. Vitamin D enhances calcium absorption from food, and then K2 make sure that that calcium goes to the right places like bones and teeth rather than our soft tissues. So it also helps in reducing our risk of hypercalcemia. K2 is found in the highest food sources in long fermented cheese, Parmesan cheese, Gouda. Vitamin D is sometimes formulated with K2 in supplementary options. I hope this has provided some light on some of the misconceptions and fears around vitamin D and helped you to decide whether looking into deficiency and looking into supplementation might be the right choice for you. Let me know in the comments if this was illuminating. Please like and subscribe and just give me a comment to say that you're watching. It would mean a lot to me, and I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, be it sunny or rainy or cloudy or snow.